Um, for those who have missed some session and for those who are joining us for the first time, I'm just going to take a very quick review of what we have covered so far, and that's from chapter 1 to chapter 8. So remember, in the beginning I told you, if there's one verse I want you to remember in the Gospel of Mark, and that's verse 1. The beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Because it is in verse 1, it contains the content of the whole Gospel and also the structure of the whole Gospel. Because Mark divided his Gospel of 16 chapters into 2 parts. Part 1 is from chapter 1 to 8, and then part 2 is from chapter 9 to 16. So he cleverly divided his gospel into, right in the middle. And he divided it geographically. What I mean to say is, from chapters 1 to 8, his ministry, his public ministry, revolves around Galilee. So he didn't go too far. I mean, he went to the surrounding area, Capernaum, Decapolis, even up to Tyre and Sidon, as we saw last time. So in part 1, and that's chapter 1 to 8, his public ministry is just around Galilee. Then on chapter 9 to 16, from the northern part of Israel, which is Caesarea Philippi, he started to go down south. But it's actually going up, because Jerusalem is, that's why Jerusalem is called Mount Zion. It's on a high mountain. So he was going up, but geographically he was going down from Galilee to Jerusalem. So for next 8 chapters he will descend to Jerusalem. So that's geographically, but theologically, or what Bible scholar says, Christologically, meaning Christology talks about the identity of Jesus. So on part 1, like I said, that's why verse 1 is very important, because, it's at the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. The title Christ appeared for the first time. So from verse 1 up to chapter 8, this is the second time that we hear the word Christ. And it comes from the mouth of Peter, who is a Jew, because the title Christ is important for the Jews, because they've been waiting for the Messiah. Christ is in Greek, Messiah is in Hebrew. So he had this, like what we read in our scripture. He proclaimed that, yes, you are the Christ. So on the second part of the Gospel of Mark, theologically, Mark will develop now the second identity of Jesus, he is the Son of God. That's why at the end of, in chapter 15, you see Jesus Christ hanging on the cross and breathe his last. And then the centurion who was standing at the foot of the cross, after seeing that Jesus died, he said, "This must be the Son of God." Again, this is the second time the word Son of God appeared in the Gospel of Mark. We've heard it before. You're, like the unclean spirit proclaiming, "You're the Holy One of God." But it's not from the lips of a human person. So this is the first time that the word Son of God was proclaimed by a human person. And he is a centurion. He's a Greek. No, he's a Roman centurion, so he's a pagan. And the title Son of God is very important to the Romans, because who is called the Son of God? The emperor. The Roman emperors, they call themselves the Son of God, because they're number one. They all came from Caesar, who claims himself the divine. He calls himself as the God. So all his descendants call themselves as the Son of God. So I hope you can appreciate the significance of this person, this pagan, proclaiming that Jesus is the Son of God. Is that clear? That's clear. Okay. All right. So So just again, like I said, I'd like to recap what we've covered from the beginning. And there's a theme. Mark is not just throwing stories and seeing what sticks on the wall, but he has a pattern, he has a theme that he wants to develop. And like I said, all he wants to do is to tell us who Jesus Christ is. Like I said, the first 8 chapters is who is Christ. So the first, in our second session, we talk about chapter 1. And this is the prologue where Jesus' identity was proclaimed by John the Baptist, who Jesus said that he is the stronger one. And also he was proclaimed by God the Father when he was baptized. When the voice from the heaven said, "This is my Son, with whom I am well pleased." Second one is, Jesus started his public ministry in Galilee. And he just came with power and authority, casting out unclean spirit, healing his mother, Peter's mother-in-law, cleansed that leper, and he teaches with authority. That all the people, their first reaction is they're all amazed in his words and in his action. So he came with power and authority. So because of Jesus' success, it invited opposition. That's what happened. If you're successful, people get to see you more, and it invited opposition. And we saw at least three groups that opposed him: the Pharisees, the scribes, and the Herodians. Next one is Jesus. There's like 4 types of people who follows him. First of all, the thousands of people, the crowds. The second one are the religious leaders who follows him around, the enemies. Of course, we also see the relatives. And of course, the last one are the disciples. And of course, the disciples are the people who are in Jesus' inner circle. And then on Mark chapter 4, Jesus told us about parables. And he said that those who are in, they understand the parable. And if they don't understand, Jesus explained it to them. But those who are out, everything is in riddles, is in parable. And then Mark told us 4 miracles consecutively. And these 4 miracles are about lessons on faith and fear. Because in the midst of, what they call this, difficulties, danger, there's only 2 responses. You can either respond in fear or you can respond in pain. And for those who are in, you're supposed to respond in faith. And then Jesus sent out his disciples on a mission, and he told them that it will receive different reception and expect rejection and persecution. And then Jesus performed his greatest miracle. He multiplied the loaves and fed the multitudes, which of course, that's the greatest miracle that Jesus did, because that's the only miracle that is found in all 4 Gospels. And then last week, I think, we saw that Jesus was reaching out to the Gentiles. And we have 3 stories or 4 stories on that one. Jesus and the Gentile woman. And of course, Jesus healing the deaf and mute. And then for the second time, Jesus multiplied the loaves and fed the multitudes. And at the end of our episode last time is Jesus had an argument with the Pharisees because they were demanding signs from heaven that he was the one that was sent by God. But Jesus refused to give them any sign because, we have a saying in Tagalog, ang taong natutulog-tulugan ay mahirap gisingin, something like that. Something like that. Anyway,
Translate.
Translate.
Translated in English. Or the person who's pretending to be
To
sleeping
sleep.
It's difficult
is
to wake
difficult to
wake up.
To wake up.
It
So,
don't sound good.
so no matter whatever kind of miracles that Jesus does, they just won't see it. They just keep a blind eye. But at the same time, he also scolded the disciples for failing to recognize Jesus, for failing to see him. And we have this consecutive, lectures from Jesus when he said, "Don't you get it? Do you have eyes to see? Do you have any ears to hear? Do you not understand?" What is Jesus to do with these stubborn disciples? So, and which is what our episode for tonight. So, like I said, Mark has a sequence of stories that are all connected to each other. So tonight we'll see. It's only 16 verses, the shortest one we have so far. Next week we'll have the whole chapter 9, but tonight we'll just have 16 verses, but it's very loaded. We'll begin with Jesus curing the blind man, and then Jesus asking the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter will, of course, proclaim that you are the Christ. And Jesus predicted his passion, death, and resurrection. And then lastly, Jesus will tell us the paradox of the Christian life. If anyone will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Okay, so we'll go with the first episode, which is the curing of the blind man. And they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands upon him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see men, but they look like trees walking." Then again he laid his hand upon his eyes, and he looked intently and was restored and saw everything clearly. And he sent him away to his home, saying, "Do not even enter the villages." Okay, what can we say about this healing of the blind man? Because the healing of the blind man is very significant in three ways. First of all, like the deaf and mute from last episode, the healing of a blind man is a miracle. It's a messianic sign that the prophets, at least prophet Isaiah prophesied that the Messiah will do when he comes. And I have some readings, which you saw last time already. So in Isaiah 29, Isaiah said, "In that day the deaf shall hear the words of a book, and out of their gloom darkness the eyes of the blind shall see." And again in Isaiah 32, "Then the eyes of the blind of those who will not be closed, and the ears of those who hear will hearken. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. And then shall the lame leap like a harp, and the tongue of the dumb sing for joy." So the healing of the blind man is very significant, because these are the signs that the people are looking when the Messiah will come. Remember, the Pharisees are looking for a sign, and like I said, Jesus has been giving them signs, but they refuse to look, to see. It's also significant because Jesus fulfilled these messianic signs. Like in Luke chapter 4, when Jesus came back for the first time in Nazareth, and then he opened the book of the scroll, and he points to this reading from Isaiah. It's actually Isaiah, I think, chapter 63 or 62. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim the release to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind." And then, like what we heard last time, when John sent his representatives to us, are you the real McCoy? Or are you the, you're not the real one? And then Jesus replied, go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed. And the third way it is significant is usually And thirdly, the healing of the blind man is significant because in the Bible, the blind man is usually a metaphor for spiritual blindness. As we have seen in our last session, the Pharisees and the disciples are not physically blind, but they are spiritually blind because they failed to see Jesus. Who is he really? So, the healing of the blind man in Bethsaida is unique. Why is it unique? Because this healing is only reported in the Gospel of Mark. This healing of the blind man in Bethsaida, you can only find it in the Gospel of Mark. Not in Matthew, not in Luke, not in John. Like I said, only Mark has the healing of two blind men. This one in Bethsaida, and then later on in chapter 10 in Jericho. His name is Bartimaeus. He will cure another blind man. Like I said, Mark just didn't throw the stories and see what sticks, but he has a plan. So in between these two blind men, a lot of things will happen. And that's what mostly what part 2 is all about. So this one, this is the only healing. It is unique also because this is the only healing that is performed progressively, like in 2 stages. Let me see. Jesus has to repeat it twice because he did not get the full healing on the first try. Like it says here in verse 23, when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands upon him, he asked him, do you see anything? And he looked up and said, I see man, but they look like trees walking. So he didn't get the full healing. He did the ritual. He spit on his hand and applied it on the man's eyes. And when he asked the guy, do you see anything? Yeah, I can see, but it's not that clear. He said, I see men, but they look like trees walking. So he had to do it again. Then again, he had laid his hand upon his eyes, and he looked intently. Jesus is serious. And was restored, and then on, saw everything clearly. Usually, we've seen this in all his miracles. Jesus just commands, come out of him, or be made clean, be healed. The last one, Ephata, be open. And he sometimes do remote healing. He doesn't even have to say a word. Like, the daughter of the Canaanite woman. It's remote healing. But this time, Jesus had to ask the blind man, do you see anything? Is he unsure? Was Jesus unsure of his healing power that he had to ask him? And that's why this is called a progressive healing. Because perhaps, why does Jesus have to do a progressive healing or in two stages? Because probably of the difficulty of healing this blind man. Jesus had a difficulty in healing this blind man. And why is it difficult for this blind man? Because this blind man represents the disciples and their spiritual blindness. They have been with Jesus since chapter 1. Maybe since 2 years, for 2 years now, since the beginning. And everything Jesus had done, Jesus had done, they still fail to understand who Jesus is. They did not understand the lobes because of their hardness of heart. So what did Jesus do with this man and with these disciples? Jesus will have to go over them again. Go over and over and over. Explain it to them. Repeat the process again. And this is the meaning and significance of this healing. This healing just doesn't talk about this blind man, but it talks about the disciples. So beginning today, Jesus will open their eyes again on who really is He. So like the disciples, this is what Jesus do to us also. I think this is a question for us too. Do we really know Jesus? Do we really understand Him? All of us have our own blindness, and we don't see the world the way Jesus sees it. I've been, like I said, I've had my conversion when I was 18 years old. I'm past 60, so it's more than 40, almost 50 years now. And my vision of Jesus, or the way I look at changes depending on my situation in life. The way, of course, when my first conversion, I was totally gung-ho. I can die for Jesus during that time. But, as years go by, then you start to go down. But He is very patient. He continues to work with me. He reboots my system. Jesus is very patient with me, with us, as Jesus is patient with His disciples. He reboots our system over and over again, every time we fail to understand Him. So some of you may have a great understanding of who Jesus is, like Gisela. I'm just teasing you. Okay. So, but if Jesus is patient with you, then you should have be patient with yourself. Okay? Okay. So let's continue. And Jesus went on with His disciples to the villages of Caesarea and Philippi. And on the way He asked His disciples, "Who do men say that I am?" And they told Him, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets." And He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered Him, "You are the Christ." And this was our reading like 2 Sundays ago. So I don't know what the priest told you, but I don't know what I'm going to say much with what the priest said. So like I said in my text, this is a turning point in the Gospel of Mark. And I mean this when I said it's the climax of the Gospel of Mark. And I mean that literally because, like I said, we're at the highest point in Israel. So that Caesarea, the one with the circle, is Caesarea Philippi. That's the most northern part of Israel. And that's also a mountain top. Okay? As shown in this map, okay? 2 questions. Why did Jesus ask the 2 questions? Who do men say that I am? But who do you say that I am? I think when Jesus asked this question, Jesus did not ask about the crowd's opinion or the opinion of the disciples for His benefit or to affirm Himself. Is Jesus asking not sure who He is, that He had to ask what people think about Him? Of course, He knows already. He already knows who He is. But He's asking this question to test them on how far they have come in their understanding of who Jesus is. So, also when Jesus asked, "Who do men say that I am?" It is also important to know that Jesus was not really interested with what other people think of Him, but He was really interested with what His disciples think of Him. And then He said, "But you," perhaps looking around individually, John, Peter or Mary, okay, or Andrew. Probably look at them one by one. Who do you say that I am? It is like Jesus asking the blind man earlier. It's like, do you see anything? When you look at me, do you see anything? Or maybe, how well can you see? Do you really know who I am? Who do you say that I am? So, and this question applies to all of you, who is listening to me now. 2,000 years later, Jesus is no longer interested with what his disciples think of him. But he is now interested in what you think of him. And he's asking each one of us, as Christian and as Catholic, who do you say that I am? Who is Jesus Christ for you? And just as people have different answers, like the prophets, John the Baptist, we have to answer this question ourselves. Unfortunately, for some of us who are born Christians, we call them ourselves cradle Catholics because we are born Christians or born Catholics. Sometimes we go about our Christian life without even considering this question. Have you asked this question to yourself? Who is Jesus Christ for me? Perhaps this is the first time somebody is asking you this question. Because, like I said, we go about our Christian life without even considering this question. It is already given, and we don't have to earn our discipleship. When we were baptized, it's our parents who answered this question for you. Now that we are adults, you have to answer it yourself, because it's really important that you know Jesus in a personal way. So, did they get it right? Did they get it right? Of course, finally Peter got the answer right. In verse 29, Peter said, "You are the Christ." Like I said, this is the second time the word Christ appeared. It took 8 chapters before the disciples, represented by Peter, to recognize Jesus as the Christ. Like I said, the disciples are slow in figuring out who Jesus is. And Peter answered, "You are the Christ." If you go by the Gospel of Matthew, there's a long version of this. Okay. So I'll put this to you. On Matthew, the corresponding reading in Matthew, Jesus said, after Peter proclaimed that you are the Christ, Jesus said this, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the powers of death shall not prevail against it." Surprisingly, in the Gospel of Mark, when Mark tells us the story, Jesus does not say any one word of affirmation or any word of commendation. He didn't say, "Blessed are you." He just went directly and he charged them, "Don't tell anyone." So he went directly and he charged them to tell no one about him. So Peter says, "You are the Christ," and you know what Jesus said? Jesus said, "Don't tell anyone." Is Jesus being anticlimactic here? Like I said, this has been building up. And then when Peter got it right, he just bring them down. He said, "Don't tell anyone about it." This is probably means you are right, but let's keep it a secret. It might also mean you are right, but not quite right enough. And don't say another word until you get your story clearer or picture clearer. Peter thought he got an A+, but actually he got a B+. It's like my son Nathan, when he was in, I think, first year high school, when he got his GPA of 4, he was so excited and happy to tell us that he got a GA 4. But then when he found out that his classmates got a 4.4, he was a little bit disappointed because he knows he could have done more. GPA of 4 was good, but was not good enough. And this is probably applies to Peter. He thought he got it right, but it's not the best answer. So Peter's grade, like I said, it's more like a B+. So Peter is like that blind man earlier. That's why, like I said, this story is connected together. Peter is like the blind man earlier. He can see Jesus because he was able to proclaim, but he doesn't see him clearly. He sees Jesus like trees walking. So like I said, that's why Jesus said, don't tell anyone about it until you get it clearer, until you see the true picture of me. Yes, Peter, because, let's see. All right. And he began to teach them, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said it this plainly, and Peter took him and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not on the side of God, but of men." So, in verse 31, Jesus dropped a bombshell, and they were shocked. Okay, like the bomb that's falling in Lebanon now. They were shocked. Peter was shocked, and very understandably, because like all the Jews at the time, they were expecting a triumphant Christ, a triumphant Messiah, a powerful king who will liberate them from Rome, from the bondage of Rome, or an economic Messiah who will make their life prosperous. Yes, Peter got it right, but like I said, but not quite right enough. Because we cannot know Jesus by just his miracles, his powerful healings, and powerful teaching. It is only through his suffering and death on the cross that Jesus reveals his true identity. The cross is not only a symbol for us, but it is a means that we can truly know him. Which is why Jesus predicted his passion, death, and resurrection. Not once, not twice, but 3 times in the next 3 chapters of Mark. So what did Peter do? Not liking what he heard from Jesus. In verse 32, Peter began to rebuke Jesus. You know, we've heard this word rebuke many times already. Remember, he rebuked the unclean spirit. He rebuked the wind, the strong wind. And Jesus is doing the same thing. He's rebuking Jesus. He wants Jesus to stop. He tried to silence Jesus. He said, "Be quiet. Jesus, be quiet. I cannot stand what you're saying. You don't." Then, of course, Jesus got so angry with Peter and rebuked him in return.
They're rebuking each other.
They're rebuking each other. He was to silence Peter this time. And there's 2 reasons why he got mad at Peter. First is he didn't understand what Messiah is. But the second one is he tried to dissuade Jesus. He tried to convince Jesus to abandon the mission. In the Gospel of Matthew, he said, "No, you should not go to that mission because you are the Christ, and we've seen you." And Jesus rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan." Jesus saying to Peter that what you're saying is not from you, but from Satan. And I like this picture. I hope you can see it. So it's like, you can just imagine, supposed to be the master is walking in front. And that's why people behind you, that's what you call followers. Okay, you have the leader and you have a follower. So here you can just figure it out that Peter wants to go ahead of Jesus, telling him, probably they're walking, and then he was going ahead of Jesus, telling him, you don't say that. And then what did Jesus do? Get behind me, Satan. You are just a follower of mine. I'm the master, and you are just a student. Get behind me. So that's why, like I said, I like this picture. Get behind me, Satan. And he called to him the multitude with his disciples and said to them, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Like I said, we begin this Gospel of Mark with chapter 1. That's why it's really important. The beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And I told you the meaning of the word gospel. It means good message or good news. Remember, do you remember that? So what if I tell you at the beginning of session 1 that this good news will end in suffering and death?
Wow.
You probably won't come back to the second session. So that's why Mark didn't tell them at the beginning that I'm just going to suffer and die. He waited for 8 chapters before Jesus tells them. Because, he's developing his character, like I said. That it will require you to deny yourself, take up your cross, not only Jesus, by the way, but you as well. So is it still a good news? Is this still a good message? So Jesus dropped another bombshell, and they were doubly shocked. Okay, because Jesus is laying down 2 conditions as a follower of Christ. Because he said, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. I haven't told you about literary structure for a long time. But we have a short sandwich structure here. It begins with come after me, and it ends with follow me, and the mid is deny himself, meaning it's a form of relinquishing. It's a form of giving up. And secondly is take up your cross. It's a form of welcoming. It's a form of accepting. One is giving up, and the other one is accepting. Okay? And then Jesus dropped another bombshell, okay? Because you think it's only for the disciples. No, it's not. Because it says here that anyone would come up. No, he said, and he called to him the multitude with his disciples. So this is not a private teaching that he is surrounded by the 12 disciples, and he told them, anyone would come after me must deny himself and take up his cross. No, he told them to the whole crowd that was listening. It's not only for the disciples, but for the crowd that was there, and it also applies to us who are now in St. Michael's Hall. And this is, and I like that word when it says there that Jesus told them, he said this plainly. When he tells this condition, he's not over-exaggerating, he's not underwhelming it, he just say it plainly. Not using highfalutin words or complicated words, but he just says this plainly. Anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross. Okay. So Jesus set 2 conditions like I had said. So I hope I can explain this clearly. So let me try, okay? Sets 2 conditions to come after him. Like I said, one is to deny oneself and take up one's cross. The first one is deny himself, which involves giving up. And the second one is take up his cross, which involves accepting. So let us look at the first condition to be considered a disciple. He said, deny himself. So let me talk about what it is not, what the word denying is not. So I went to Webster Dictionary and looked for the definition of deny or denying. So the first definition I found is to restrain from gratification of desires, which we probably understand by giving up something, isn't it? To restrain from gratification of desire by giving up. So this is a common misconception of what Jesus meant. First of all, notice that Jesus did not say, if anyone would come after me, let him hate himself. He didn't say, let him hate himself. Jesus is not asking us to deny our basic humanity, our basic needs, physical, emotional, and even pleasures. We are not asked to devalue ourselves. We are not to treat the body as separate from the soul or the spirit. So denying is not a form of self-improvement or self-discipline or even spiritual asceticism. Like what psychologists like you to do, or Tony Robbins, the popular, what's his motivational speaker, who might suggest you doing yoga like the Zen Master, do some meditation. Denying self is not about a call to spiritual asceticism, where you reject all pleasures, like like a monk. You go to, isolate yourself and seek only spiritual things. This is not self-denial, like you are giving up something. Like what we do during Lent. You give up chocolate, coffee, fast food, or anything that we usually like to do. These are all good, by the way. It's a form of penance, but this is not what the word denying is all about. Okay, after having said that, what is denying then? So I went to the second definition of denying, and it says denying is disavowing any connection with someone. Like, I don't know this, I don't know Michael, I don't know Lulu, I don't know Michelle. Not with someone, not with something. It's like, in this case, not with something, but with someone. And that someone is not Michael, it's not Lulu, it's yourself. You're denying yourself, that you know yourself. It's actually the word deny. Mark will use the word deny later on in his gospel when he refers to Peter's denial of Jesus in the trial of Jesus. Remember, Peter was standing in the courtyard and warming himself at the fire. And then a little maiden asked him, do you know this man who is now being tried? And Peter replied, I don't know this man that you're talking about. So Peter denied that he had any connection with Jesus, said that he did not know him. Thus he denied the Lord. And this is the exact same word that Jesus used when he said, deny yourself. Very important. Denying means we deny that we own ourselves, giving up our right to ourselves, our right to run our lives. We don't have the right, we don't have the final right to decide what are we going to do or where to go. That's a hard saying, isn't it? But this is very fundamental with Jesus. It strikes at the heart of our existence. Because one thing as human being we value and protect above anything else is the right to make our ultimate decision for ourselves. Especially in America. Maybe not in the Philippines, where it's the parents who take charge. But in America, our individual freedom, we refuse to be under anything or anybody, but reserves the right to make our own decisions. to ourselves. We don't give up the ability to self-rule. You know, during COVID, nobody can make me wear a mask. Or nobody can mandate me to get the vaccine. You know, I make my own decision. And this is contrary to our culture, the tendency to self-preserve and to advance oneself. This is what Jesus is talking about. Jesus denying is not a giving up things or that, but giving ourselves. Giving up ourselves to run our lives. I hope that's clear. Okay. Second one is take up his cross. Like I did with deny, I'll begin with what it is not. And like I said, this is the opposite of the first one, because this one is accepting. And accepting what? Accepting the cross. And what does take up the cross mean? So the first, what cross is not. So many people think that cross is any kind of trial or hardship that you are going through. You always call them as cross. You know, like your mother-in-law or your nagging wife or your cheating husband, or your mean boss, or if you have any handicap, physical, mental, or any sickness or death in the family, and we all say, that's my cross. But it's not, okay? At least that's not exactly what Jesus meant about the cross. You know, actually the word cross didn't appear in the Old Testament. You cannot find the word cross in the Old Testament. It's a New Testament language. Of course, crucifixion is happening during that time. I think it was invented by the
Romans.
By the Persians, but the Romans really did it systematically. Sometimes they crucify hundreds of people in one day. It's a form of capital punishment. And that's the cross that we are talking about. And that's the cross that Jesus was talking about when he said, you take up his cross. The cross was something different. It was the criminal's cross in which he was hung and died. So we now casually say the cross. But in Jesus' time, the cross is a place of degradation, of shame, where a person is demeaned and debased. You are paraded naked and hang on the cross at the city gates. It is a criminal's cross where the criminal is brought to submission by the Roman authority. Of course, we are no longer required to die for our faith. Some people do. Some in countries in the Middle East, some people still die for their faith. But we are not required to die for our faith. But we are required to die to ourselves. Now the cross stands for us, a forever symbol for those circumstances, events in our life which humbles us, exposes us, offends our pride and shame us, all of which we surrender to God. So what are the things that humbles you, exposes you, offend your pride, shame you? Jesus says, if we are a disciple, we should surrender all this to God. You are to welcome it. This is what he means, take up your cross, accept it, glorify it, cling to it, because it is something that is good for you. It is your salvation. I know that's a hard saying to swallow, but come to think of it. It's the cross that brings you closer to God. Because when everything is going well, you have a high palaces, you have all the things that you need. And that's how far you can be far from God. But if there's a cross that's holding you down, and that's the time that you stay close to God. That's why the cross is your salvation. So this does not mean that only the big things in our life, it's also the little things. So do you feel hurt when someone forgets your name? Do you get upset when your credit card is rejected? Does criticism hurt even you know it is justified? All these forms of minor forms of cross are all at work in our lives. And the Lord said that if we're going to be a disciple, we are not to be offended by little things. And it comes with age. You know, when I was young, I'm more, I get upset easily with small things. But when you grow old, I don't know about the old people around this room, you tend to mellow down, and because you have seen many things already. That this is not the end of the world. And you can tolerate things. And you can see how radical this approach to life is, how different it is from the way the world around us tell us. The word says, if you see the cross, you escape it. Don't take it. Avoid it. If you cannot avoid it, then strike back. Get angry, get even, offend in return, get us upset about it. But the word of Jesus said, if you are going to be my disciple, deny yourself and take up your cross. Okay, this is the last one. For whoever will save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel will save it. For what does it profit to gain the whole world and forfeit his life? For what can a man give in return for his life? For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. So a little bit of literary structure. Why do we do it? Why the three motives to follow Jesus? First, the three actions of Jesus. He will be rejected, be killed, and rise again. And the three actions required for the disciples: deny, take up your cross, and follow me. And the motive is, why do you do it? Save your life, to gain your life, and to gain glory in the end. And why we want to follow Jesus? He said in verse 35, for whoever will save his life will lose it. And whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel will save it. This is what you call a paradox, because it's contrary to what we're thinking, contrary to what the world tells us. Because who is not interested in saving his life? All of us wants to save our lives, isn't it? Of course, we all want that. We all want a life that is worthwhile, a life that is complete, full and rich. Each one of us deep down hunger for a life like this and longs to find it. If this is what you want, Jesus is telling us how to find it, to find your life. And you know what he said? Lose it. That's why I call it a paradox. Because there are only two choices in life. You can only have one or the other. First is save your life now. Hoard it, cling to it, hold on to it, take care of yourself only. See that in every situation, your first and major concern is, what's in it for me? Trust only yourself. This is one way to live your life. And many people are living this way today, including most of us in one way or another, one time or another. But at the end of the day, only to find that all of this time, the life you tried to grasp has slipped through the fingers, and you ended up dissatisfied, hollow and empty. Look at all the people who has everything, and yet find themselves not fulfilled. I just thought about this. Sean P.P. Combs, that's his name. PDD is now being tried. Okay. He has everything in the world. And now he's being tried and he's being I'm sure he's not happy. And there's a lot of people like that.
He's on a suicidal watch.
Suicide watch.
Yeah.
They said it today, he's not suicide, but anyway.
And how many movie stars that you know? Amen. Sometimes they commit suicide. They have everything. Of course, the other way, of course, is to lose it, like what Jesus said. Throw it away. Depend on God. Trust Him of what may happen to you. Then you will find contentment and satisfaction, an inner peace, and a sense of worth about living. You will discover, not just in heaven, which is our ultimate goal, not just in heaven someday, but right now, that even though you might not have all the things in the world that others have, your life will be rich and rewarding and satisfying. And in verse 36, Jesus said that, for what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and fulfill his life? So this is Jesus opening the eyes of the disciples of what it means to be a disciple. So to explain this, I would like to share with you two stories from history. Okay, the first one is the story of Charlemagne. So he's a French emperor about the year 1000. Many years ago, archaeologists discovered his tomb in the great 9th century king and emperor of France. When his tomb was opened, after being closed for centuries, the men who entered it, they found something amazing. Not only that they found all the treasures, certain treasures of the kingdom, of course, but in the center of the large vault was a throne like this one. Not exactly that one, but I guess the picture. And seated on the throne was his skeleton, with an open Bible on his lap and a bony finger pointing at the words, "For what does it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and loses his own soul?" He's the emperor. He has everything. But his last word is, what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? I don't know what happened to him when he went up to heaven, but everything that he gathered in his life, his power, treasures, his influence, all stayed on the earth, and he was not able to bring them. What a tremendous lesson from history to those who follow. Of course, the second one is Alexander the Great. I'm sure you have heard his name. At the age of 33, Alexander earned the title the Great, because he's great, because he was able to conquer vast territories and expanded the Greek Empire and its influence throughout not only Europe, but in Africa, in Middle East also. Then at age 33, he contracted a disease, malaria, which is, probably they don't have a cure at that time, which still a lot of third world countries suffer from this. And within 10 days he died, after contracting malaria, within 10 days. But before he died, he called his generals and told them about his 3 wishes, and told them why. Why he I want these 3 dying wishes. First, he said, I want the best doctor to carry my coffin, to demonstrate that in the face of death, even the best doctors in the world have no power to heal. Second, I want the road to be covered with my treasure, so that everybody sees that material wealth acquired on earth stays on earth. And then number 3 wish, I want my hand to swing in the wind outside my coffin, so that the people understand that we come into this world empty-handed, and we leave this world empty-handed, after the most treasure of all is exhausted. And you know what the treasure that all of us have time. The fact that you woke up this morning means you still have time. You still have time to think of what we covered this evening. That's why, like I said, Jesus, in this second part of the Gospel of Mark, will start opening the eyes of the disciples so that they will clearly see who Jesus is and who they are as his disciples. I don't know what time is. Okay, we're okay.